I'm excited about our next speaker, and I'm sure you will too. How many of us have heard the term big data? It's come up several times already today, and those two simple words can strike fear and excitement in everybody in about a heartbeat. What do we do with all of this information that's now available to us, and how does it not become so overwhelming and intimidating that you get paralyzed? We have the good pleasure of having Shailesh Rao with us, who's the Director of Emerging Products at Google's Enterprise Division. He has spent the better part of the last 2 decades getting at the heart of what data can do for people and the big data opportunities that are available for brands. So he's going to share his wisdom today about what's going on in big data, what you as brand marketers can do with it. And I will just tell you, if you do a Google search on Shailesh, you will not find out that he likes to eat chicken wings. You will not find that out. And he also likes a glass of grappa, a perfect glass of grappa as his guilty pleasures. So please join me in welcoming Shailesh to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. Can you all hear me? Great. It's a pleasure to be here in Columbus. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you to the resource team. Never been here before, but it's the first time for everything. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this morning. As John was saying, it's 20 years of my career, but actually my attraction to data started much earlier as a little kid growing up in India, because my dad's favorite saying was that he trusted in God and everyone else had to bring data. And that was usually what I heard when I came back after a test and he asked me how it went. And I said, oh, it was great. He said, well, let's see when the report cards come out. It's a pleasure to be here. And what I want to do is I have about 35 minutes. I'm going to spend, here's how I want to spend the time. I want to talk about some big trends that you're all familiar with, but really give you some data, again, about those trends. And what we see at Google when we talk about big data, what we've done about it at Google, and what we're seeing in other companies. This is not so much about Google's technology, because I don't want it to be about Google's technology. I do want to show you a demo at the end, because I think it will be interesting if it works. It's all in the cloud, so we'll pray to the internet gods. Because I think what I want to do is show you the power of what big data can do, because we're talking about personalization, we're talking about markets of one. Let's look at what's going on. This is just, this slide here has got nothing to do with the industry you're in, or whether you're an agency, or you're working for a brand, or you're a consumer. This is just a fact that we're all experiencing. In 1957, the average age of a company that was in the S&P 500 was 75 years. That's how long it took for a company to get into the S&P 500, which means, getting the S&P 500 means you have a certain level of growth, you have a certain number of customers, you have a certain balance sheet that's strong, you have enough liquidity, you can pay the bills, you have a brand. Today, it takes 10 years. The average age of the company in the S&P 500 today is 10 years. And look at how fast that has dropped. And that's because the pace at which companies are, the pace at which we live, the pace at which companies compete and operate has shifted dramatically in the last many years. Here's another example. This is a fundamental trend, and again, this crosses every industry, every geography, every segment of every market. The first one is just speed at which you react to things, speed at which you bring products out, speed at which you decide, speed at which you engage, just the pace at which we live and work. And the second is this market of one idea, which is no matter who you are, no matter which industry you're in, you're competing against everybody else to win the mind and heart of every individual consumer. This company called Ouya, how many of you have heard of Ouya? How many of you have Ouya in your house? I see a few hands back there. It's a gaming console, it's pretty cool. Their goal was to raise $950,000 in a month using crowdsourcing. Break away the traditional venture capital model, go out and raise money from people like you and me. They raised $1 million in 8 hours and $8.5 million in a month. Every individual could invest using Kickstarter, which is another place if you all want to invest in ideas. I've invested in a bunch of companies now. I'm through AngelList. I can now invest in companies with as little as $1,000. All of you can. $1,000. That's all it takes to invest in companies. So Everybody individually can now be part of every decision that every company makes. And that is, I think, the holy grail. Now, it works in certain industries like this better than it does in others. But you heard from the presentation earlier, I mean, you want every cat owner to feel that connection to the brand. And this is happening across the board. Why? Because we're more connected. This is just for the United States alone. And then imagine there are still, all of us are familiar with all the stuff going on with mobile and how many people owning a smartphone, and 90% of us, 95% of us have some data in the cloud, and we're creating data at an amazing rate. And we just have started scratching the surface, and here's why. There are still 5 billion people on this planet who don't yet have a reliable internet connection. Can you imagine what's going to happen to data and the things you can do with that data when those 5 billion people come online and they're not in the United States? They're in emerging markets. They're in India. They're in China. They're in sub-Saharan Africa. There's 5 billion people. We just take it for granted. Imagine where we're going to be in the next 10 years. It's mind-boggling. When you think big data, there's 3 things that come to mind. At least this is what I've seen. I think this is, there's people in the industry that talk about this as well. It really comes down, the reason this is such a problem, and also a huge opportunity for all of us, is we are now, as a society, creating data through these 3 levers like we've never before. The volume at which we're creating data is growing like we've never seen before. The velocity with which we're creating data, generating data, and therefore, by definition, consuming it, and the variety of sources from which we're creating and consuming that data. Let me just give you an example on each of these. Let's talk about volume. How many of you have seen this chart before? Some version of it? This shows the shipments of PCs, tablets, and smartphones for the last few years. And the experts said in 2009 that by 2014, maybe 2015, 2014, smartphones and tablets will outpace PC shipments globally. Eric Schmidt, our chairman, says this very often. He reminds us of this all the time at Google, which is we tend to overestimate the impact of technology change in the short term, and we almost always underestimate the impact of technology in the long run. We see all this stuff about big data going on. We think, oh my God, by the end of this year, everybody's going to have a big data solution. Everybody's going to be mining big data and doing amazing things. We tend to overestimate the impact because it's all around us and it's more a reactionary move. But always, this has been proven more and more and more in more industries than ever. In the long term, we almost always underestimate. The experts said in 2009, it might be 2015 by the time non-PC shipments are greater than PC shipments. It happened in Q4 of 2011. And that's for the first time now as a society, starting then, we are, as a society, shipping less PCs, making less PCs than we are doing other things. So now the volume at which we're going to be creating data is just phenomenal because you can create it from anywhere. You're not tethered to a laptop. You have your phone. You're everywhere. Wherever you find data, wherever you want to consume data. That's why this is happening. The second is the volume. I talked about variety, volume, and variance, or velocity, volume, and variance. This is another interesting piece of data that just shows you how fast people have started engaging on the internet. You can read the chart there. I mean, you can look at iOS, Android, and compare that. This is how fast it took for each of these things to reach X million subscribers, 150, 200, etc. Last year, about this time, we were activating about, I think, 500,000 Android devices a day. We closed the year at 800,000, and I think it's going to get more. That's every day. That's how many people are activating Android devices and getting online. And that means they're using data, consuming data, interacting with data. And finally, we talk about variety. This is happening in your industries, whether you accept it or not. And you can do something about it or choose not to. We are now interacting on multiple sources, on multiple channels. It's not just Facebook, YouTube, chat. I mean, we create now, I think, 60 hours of video is generated on YouTube every minute. Is uploaded. And that number is going up faster and faster and faster. So the volume at which we're creating data, the variety of sources, both in and out, in which we consume and produce data, and the volume of data that we're generating is really what's causing a fundamental shift in the way we're looking at data. And for you, what that means is you can do something about it. And if you haven't started, not to worry. Because remember, we overestimate the impact of technology. There's still a long way to go. We're just getting started. This is what it has led to. People familiar with exabyte? That's 10 to the power of 18 bytes. So kilo, mega, gigawatt, gigabyte, petabyte, exabyte. We create 12 exabytes of data every 2 days. And we took 500 years to create 12 exabytes of data. This is real. It's happening everywhere. The question is, can you find out what data matters? Can you find out how to ask the right questions of this data? And can you make something out of it that gives you a better business outcome? And it's a classic innovator's dilemma. Most of the innovations around big data are not happening, sorry to say, those of you in the room that are from large established brands, are not happening in the large established brands. And that is a warning sign, because that's how fundamental disruptions start. So if you're working for a large company, a large brand, you're talking about big data, time to do something about it. And it doesn't take too much, it doesn't take too much money, it takes one person. 2 people. Start a project, see what you can do. You don't need to take a lot of money, especially if you're using Google solution. I'll show you that. I'll talk about pricing as well. But this is a fundamental disruption about to happen. And we are starting to now see some of the innovative larger companies come to us. Where's big data being used? Social media, gaming companies, very, very innovative gaming companies that are really trying to understand how you play a game so they can engage with you more. And there is something there that other companies can use in other industries. And I'll tell you about how some of them are doing that. Fundamental disruption is happening. And there are those companies. Most of this, by the way, is happening in the cloud, because the fundamental economics are just simply better in the cloud. You simply do not have enough budget to buy enough servers and buy enough memory and buy enough cache to put it in your data centers to run through 100 billion rows of data and run it at the speed at which you could in the cloud. You have money, you could use it on other things, and you probably won't get funded if you wanted to go get a project like that. Which is why a lot of companies with very complex budgeting cycles are missing out on the opportunity. And I'll tell you how you could do something about it. But remember, we've seen this before. Not too long ago, we all thought the only way to watch a movie was to go down to the Blockbuster store, rent a DVD, give it back after 2 days, if we were diligent, otherwise pay the fine. Guess what happened? And when Netflix came out, I remember when Netflix came out, I bought stock when Netflix went public. And my friends thought I was stupid. I held on. They don't say that anymore. Here's what we're seeing at Google. 60 hours every minute. 100 million gigabytes is the size of the search index of Google. We launched a new one called Caffeine in 2010. That's the index of the web. So it's not when you search for something, it's not when you search for research or Cleveland or Cincinnati or whatever. That's the index that we scan through. That was about 100 petabytes in 2010. It's growing about a few percent every month. It is, I think, the world's largest index. If you were to print out that index, I think in 8-point font, you could go up to the moon and back a few times. It's huge. It's big. And we can deliver an average search to anybody on the internet in under 250 milliseconds. That is the scale at which we operate. And that's the scale at which we have to operate in order to do what Google does. What that means is that scale of that technology can also be available to you. You don't have to build another Google infrastructure. It's a massive infrastructure, scales like crazy. And the nice thing is you can rent all the capacity you want on our cloud. It's a public cloud. It's very secure, very reliable. We have large companies using it who then go through the auditing and say, yeah, is it secure? They say, come back and say, we could not have given this amount of security with the budget we had. But there are some companies and some industries that are later to adopt. Financial services, a little bit wary about, should I put data in the cloud? And part of it is they'll change over time. If they don't, somebody else will come and disrupt them. There's a bank, India, when India was opened up in 91, all the foreign banks, Standard Chartered, Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, HSBC, all the foreign banks were crazy going into India, and it became a status symbol to get an account with a bank, with a Citibank. You had a Citibank ATM card, and you would show that. You wouldn't put it on this side of the Prada bag. You would put it outside. But today, the fastest growing banks in India are not those banks. There are smaller banks like Yes Bank that came out of nowhere and is adopting technologies, and they're just fundamentally changing the economics. And all these large banks with their big, offices and that field, they're gone, right? I mean, they're there, but they're not experiencing that growth. So this is something that disruption is happening in every area because people can use these technologies. So what we did was we started with something called Google File System very early. And we have been, it's not very public because we've not done a very good job, I think, of talking about it, but we invented big data solutions before big data was even a problem, because we were in the unique position of having to solve big data problems, deciding which ad to place, on which display, on which on which property in millisecond time, and deciding the right ad and personalizing it. All of that took a lot of analysis with real data. And we did studies. We did a lot of experiments, but these were the systems that we developed, and those are the systems that you have available to you. And this is what we see in every enterprise. This is tremendous opportunity for all of you. Data is the atmosphere in which you're all living. So everybody has it. So by itself, it's not a differentiator. Just like all the different gases that make up the atmosphere, what you really need to survive is oxygen. And the one who can steal more oxygen makes it harder for the other. I don't want to make it sound very sort of, Machiavellian, but look, you're all competing. And connecting with your customers and getting that. So it's a huge opportunity for businesses. And there are so many things that you can do, and I'll talk about some of them. Why is it tough? Because it's hard to start doing some of these things. It's in the cloud, it's my data, I'm putting it on someone else's data center. Start somewhere. Start somewhere, and that's the advice I can give you. Industry studies have shown that almost every industry can leverage big data, or solutions around big data. There's insights that are available, and the size of that bubble shows you how much value can be generated through harnessing the power of big data in these industries. So if you work for these companies or your clients happen to be in these companies, there's an opportunity for you to go and make something happen with them. These are some of the examples of companies that we use. You might not have heard of them. So like I said, they're not necessarily the most well-known brands, but they're doing amazing things. And now the larger brands are coming to us. We're working, where we're getting most traction, by the way? Retail. We're working with retail companies, all the big names, and they're doing projects with us, and they're trying to understand, and they're amazed at what they can find. How many of you are in consumer packaged retail? CPG? Grocery retail? Yeah, some few of you. How valuable would it be, given the margins in retail, how valuable would it be for you if you could tell or know that in every large city in Ohio, you start a pilot in Columbus, 5 miles from every school, on a Wednesday afternoon, because the local school system lets out early on Wednesdays, on a Wednesday afternoon in the month of summer, if you had a promotion that put a specific brand of ice cream on the front of the aisle at these 3 stores, it would lead to X% increased sales. Is that data valuable to you as a CPG company? That's a big data problem. Because it requires weather, it requires local, it requires so many different dimensions of data that being able to do that effectively at a cost-effective rate is what I think is the power of big data here. So one slide only that talks about a little technology. Sorry, I can't not say anything. I'm a geek and I'm a Googler, so I have to put something in there. But essentially what Google's BigQuery does is the following. So how many of you are familiar with MapReduce, Hadoop? So Google wrote a paper on MapReduce in 2004. We published this. I don't know. Most people said we were stupid because it was like secret sauce. But Google being Google, we published it. And we've generated, this entire industry came out of that paper called MapReduce, which is essentially a way of using large computer networks to solve a data analytics problem. So you break it up, send it into a map of nodes, reduce the problem into smaller bits that each node can then process, bring it all back, and do it in a matter of seconds. That's what MapReduce was. And Hadoop and all of these things are all versions of MapReduce. And if you had not put that paper out there, it would have been Google proprietary, and we would have probably made some money. We went out, put it out there, and other people have made a lot more money, and that's fine by us because the world is a better place because of it. We then launched Dremel, which is literally the state of the art. You can't find this anywhere else because we've been upgrading our MapReduce to the next version called Dremel. And what BigQuery is, from Google, which is our big data solution for enterprises, is the instantiation of Dremel. What it does is it takes billions of rows, literally petabytes of data that you can crunch through in seconds at costs that you have never thought possible. Why? Because you're using Google's infrastructure. You don't have to buy a single thing. You can just do this from your laptop. And I'm going to show you. You don't have to buy anything. No hardware, no software, nothing. It's all running in the cloud. You stick your data in Google's cloud, and then you crunch away. Which now means you can ask questions that you didn't think you could ask before, or when you started asking them, people said, are you crazy? Do you know how much that'll cost? Or BI, hardware, software. If you're an oil and gas company, you drill holes. So, what you do is drill holes, and you're hoping to find the hole in the right place that has oil, or whatever it is you're trying to get out of it, and you drill pilot holes because you can't tell. So you drill every hole, costs you a few $1 million. Now, when you hit that real hole, that could be, that real well, that could be a few $1 billion of crude, but it might take you 200 holes at $5 million each to get to the perfect oil well. What if now you could use seismic data, geodata, your own proprietary layers of data, your own drilling data that from the last 30 years of information you've generated, and you could increase the probability of finding the real well by drilling 12 holes instead of 200. That's what big data can do. We're doing that for companies. Because you can't use traditional technologies to solve these problems. Because the technologies you have today, traditional databases, relational databases, on-premise hardware, large server farms, those were not designed for the kinds of data that you see here. So you have to use newer technologies. So let me do the following. I'll just give you a quick demo. But before I do that, 5 million companies are on Google's enterprise solutions. Not all of them are using big data. This is just all our enterprise solutions. And you'll see some of the companies in here that maybe you work for or recognize. But this is a movement. It's happening everywhere. And I want to show you a brief demo of what is possible. So I'm going to take you to Google's BigQuery. Doesn't look very pretty. It's the core engine. So I'll show you the pretty part in a minute. This is just basic Google's BigQuery. So I've got some public data sets. Unfortunately, I can't show you company data, so I've got to go with public data sets. And our biggest problem is trying to find large enough data sets. But we found some. We've got the entire English language version of Wikipedia in there. And that's about 350, I believe, million articles. And I'm running a query now, and it's running in 4 seconds. I asked it to tell me, I wrote a SQL query, don't worry about it. We have partnerships that make it, that you don't have to know SQL to do all this stuff. But what I did there was, it's happening in the cloud. It's not on my machine. It's not cached, no index. I ran that query live on Google's cloud. I don't know where it ran. Does it matter? I don't know which data center it ran from. Does it matter? Do you care what Amazon's infrastructure is or web tier is when you're buying a book? It shouldn't matter. Same thing. What I did was I asked to find out what's the most frequently edited entry in Wikipedia. How many of you would have guessed that George Bush, the entry for George Bush was edited 43,000 times on Wikipedia? Good guy, bad guy, good guy, bad guy. You know, mission accomplished, not accomplished, mission accomplished. But here's the interesting part. More surprising to me was the fact that Jesus is the 6th most edited entry. Don't we know everything about Jesus by now? I mean, it's been 2,000 years. We know everything. But there are things, these are the kinds of insights. And I wish I could show company data because just we can work with you. We can, some of the data insights that I see from our clients, mind-blowing what they can come up with. What they can come up with is just amazing. So let me show you just a couple others. This, by the way, took 4 seconds. Just took 4 seconds. Let me run another query. In 1.4 seconds, in 1.4 seconds, what we're looking for is the entire works of Shakespeare. I'm trying to see in each work, the main character, how many dialogues did they have? Think of that. Think of doing that query on your regular infrastructure. In 1.4 seconds, the cost of that query would have been 0.00004 cents. If you did it now, and you can do this exact stuff. It's public data, it's available. So that's the power of what you could do. And I could show a lot more examples of what you could do. Let me give you just one last one, and then I'll leave it there. This is a very complicated query. I'll tell you about it in a minute, or in 1.5 seconds. Those of you who know, you know about the sort problem, right? Sorting a bunch of numbers. This is essentially a sort problem, because if you have 1 billion numbers and you have to sort and find the highest one, the reason it's a hard problem is because you have to read every number, including the billionth. Because the one before it might be the highest, but until you read the last one, you're not sure it's the highest, right? Because you're looking for the highest number. We're looking for the longest word that Shakespeare's ever used in his entire works, which means we have to look at every character and count. And when we reach Northamptonshire, we think, hey, that's a long word, but, well, maybe there's another one, indistinguishable, until we reach honorific abilitudinitatibus from Love's Labor Lost, and that was the longest word he used. Think of that query, 1.5 seconds. I can't even count. I can't even tell you how cheap it was. It's like, we charged 12 cents for a gigabyte processed. That was 1.27 megabytes processed. And the reason why it's so low, even though the database is big, has to do with the amazing way we do column store databases in memory. And that's the secret sauce. So that thing would be like 0.000003 cents. Imagine what you could do with this technology. And you can do it now. When I leave, you can log into cloud.google.com, you can start a pilot, upload some data, and start asking it crazy questions. Crazy questions. If I put vinegar in beer, do you think people will like it more? We can do it. Don't have to go to Professor Early, and I'm a huge fan. It was very, very warming for me to watch him speak. I've read his books. I'm a huge fan of his work. You can do those things with this kind of data, and that's what this is all about, and that's why we're so excited. Cloud.google.com is the place to go, and I hope you will go there as soon as we're done and find amazing insights in all your data. Thank you very much.
Can you take a couple questions?
Absolutely. I was only worried about the time.
All right, so we have a couple minutes to take some questions for Shailesh. So if we could get our microphone runners out and ready to go, raise your hand if you got a question, and we'll get to you before we get him off the stage. I might ask a question while we're doing that to start. The folks in this room are obviously trying to harness big data. At the same time, there's always concerns around privacy. Yeah. And certainly Google's been in the news around that, as have many other companies. I'm just curious your perspective on the interplay between big data opportunities, yet respecting privacy.
Sure. That's a very valid question. I was at Salesforce.com in 2003 when it was a very small company. And I can't tell you how many meetings we went to. I was in sales, and we would go out and talk to customers, and they would be like, are you kidding me? Really? You wanted me to put my forecast data in your public cloud? It's got all my accounts, all my this, but... And those were the polite ones. The others said even worse things, right? But look at where Salesforce is. Look at Workday. How many of you are familiar with this company? They're doing HR in the cloud. They're PeopleSoft, but in the cloud. Public cloud, HR. How many of us are outsourced payroll? Long before we even called it cloud, we were outsourcing payroll. My point is this. Every industry goes through shifts, and this one's going through it as well. Some of the concerns are valid, not because they're technologically challenging, but because they're just, we have to step out of our comfort zone. But it's happening. Companies are realizing that actually it's more secure. We have companies using Google's storage as their backup because they think it's more secure than anything they could do themselves. Because we secure all our data centers like crazy because it runs Google. Here's the thing, big differentiator. All this stuff I showed you, is not something separate we've done at Google. All that thing I showed you was running on the same infrastructure that runs YouTube, Google, Gmail, social, everything else. So we do everything as a company to make sure it's secure, reliable, highly performant, and scalable. So that's one answer. The other one is certain industries will take time. Third, if you dig into the details of why people are afraid, sometimes you can't put customer data in the cloud, right? You can't put customer identifiable data. In the US, it's a lot easier, but in some European countries, you can't, in APAC. You can still get value out of business data without putting customer identifiable data in the cloud. Retail, that's why retail is so exciting to us, and that's why we're getting so many retail customers, because they don't have to put the customer data, they just have to put transaction data from SKUs, order data, to decide affinity between product purchases. That's not like customer identifiable, so there's no regulations around that. It's just the company getting comfortable around the security.
Okay.
But, it's an evolution, it's a journey, and I think we'll all get there eventually.
Do we have another question for Shailesh out in the crowd? You want to ask him about what flavor of chicken wings is his favorite?
Anyone. That's a small data problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Shailesh.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.